State's Attorney Fox, we'll start with you on this question. Police accountability has been a frontline topic, not just here, but across the country over the past several years. And there are just many instances I think we can all point to where communities, and especially communities around black men, have lost faith when a police officer shoots or even kills someone, a civilian, and then is not held accountable. And so would you support asking the Illinois Attorney General to appoint an independent prosecutor to oversee matters of officer-involved shootings?
When I came into office, obviously I came in at a time where an officer-involved shooting was the topic of the day in the murder of Laquan McDonald. What I said then was, and continue to say, the problem of prosecutors who work hand in hand with the police departments in being able to prosecute these cases. Now, in the first 2 months of having been in office, we did charge 2 police officers with first-degree murder, one who was on duty, one who was off. In the one that was on duty, it actually just went to verdict yesterday. He was found not guilty at a bench trial. While we're deeply disappointed in the decision, this was a case that was charged after a thorough evaluation, and the challenges of getting a guilty verdict, like across the country, exist. I think having an independent oversight of how these cases are handled is what we advocated for. So while we charged those cases and cases in which we have decided that we don't believe we have a sufficient burden, we've asked the Illinois State Appellate Prosecutors Association to do a secondary review of all of our work. Should they decide that they disagree with our declination, then they have the ability to be appointed a special prosecutor. I think for the benefit of the public, and I did that because I understood that the public did not believe that we could handle these cases. I believe we could, but that distrust is real. That distrust is well earned, and I think having an independent agency that can oversee these cases eases that concern.
Mr. Conway.
Yeah, so when I was an assistant state's attorney, I worked with hundreds, if not over 1,000 great Chicago and suburban police officers. However, I also prosecuted three police officers and convicted them. So I certainly understand the balance that has. And what I would say first off is we have to really be transparent about how we handle those cases. And to the extent that we can, if we choose not to charge a case, we need to be able to tell the public this is why we have chosen not to charge the person. To the extent we can do that without violating any grand jury secrecy, I don't think the Attorney General is the right avenue of oversight. They have not shown a willingness to get involved in these cases despite concurrent jurisdiction, and they also don't have access to a grand jury either. So but I think oversight is important. I think the state appellate prosecutor is probably the right place to do it.
And Mr. Fioretti, same question to you.
Well, I think the answer is that I think the state's attorney's office can do the job, but it's how effectively and what to do. Yesterday's shooting on the L at Grand in Chicago is very troubling. I think those of you that have seen that video are appalled, as I was when I saw it this morning. But I think the state's attorney's office does have the ability to be fair to all the parties, to make the right decision on whether to charge or not charge. At the same time, oversight has been provided from the U.S. Attorney's Office on some cases. So I think there is sufficient oversight across the board that if the state's attorney's office does not do it, it can be done. And so I think the state's attorney's office is the appropriate vehicle to charge and make the initial decision.
Thank you. Mr. Conway, we're going to build on the topic we were just discussing, police accountability, and come at it from a slightly different angle, and we'll start with you. The state's attorney is, of course, bound by Supreme Court precedent and the decisions of the U.S. Supreme Court, and the court has ruled that a criminal defendant should have any and all information about the credibility of a witness against them. Yet today, there is no system in place to ensure that information about CPD officers, including information that they have provided false reports in the past, is disclosed either to the state's attorney or the criminal defendant. How do we address the problem that I just described and bring the county in line with the Supreme Court's precedent?
Well, clearly, we have to make sure that we are that our police officers are credible when they testify before us. I mean, this county and this city has spent tens of millions of dollars due to, not to mention the inhumanity due to false testimony by police officers. So if we get in a situation where we have any reason to think that a police officer is not telling the truth, we have to make sure that we do a thorough ethics review on that officer, and then we have to make sure that our cases are being handled appropriately, because we can't put somebody who is a known perjurer, known perjurer on the stand. And frankly, our office, and I say this, like I said, as someone who has prosecuted police officers in addition to working with many great ones, our office needs to have a culture of raising these issues when our assistants see something that doesn't seem to comport with reality.
Thank you. Mr. Fioretti.
I think the problem boils down not so much when we find an officer who does certain things, but how we hire in our police department, how we train those people, how we have supervision, and how we have discipline. I find that sometimes, especially in the past, but I think there's been improvement, that we have no discipline. We have no supervision. The state's attorney has talked about the Laquan McDonald Van Dyke case. He was a classic example of somebody not having the proper supervision, of not having the proper issues brought. I mean, he was sued 3 times over the same issues, and nobody questioned him. From what I read in one of the Tribune, he was suffering from some of the same problems that we have talked about out here. And whether you have credit problems, marriage problems, alcohol problems, all those need to be brought to the forefront by your supervisor and talked about, and making sure, because those that suffer from those problems cover up before they get to the real problems, and we need honest, good police officers out there protecting the public.
Thank you. And State's Attorney Fox.
Thank you. Again, I think these are difficult conversations to have because they highlight some of the issues that we have with our partners in law enforcement. When we came into office, what we realized is that we needed to do retraining on Giglio issues. And when we did that training, what we realized is that we needed to make sure that our partners in law enforcement understood their Giglio obligations. And the reality was that many of our law enforcement partners did not understand their Giglio obligations. We then wrote a letter and sent it to the Fraternal Order of Police as well as to CPD, outlining the questions that we would ask about adverse credibility findings, asking questions about other issues of credibility that may come to bear. And the Fraternal Order of Police started to advise their rank and file members to not answer our questions. And that was, I will be honest with you, incredibly shocking to me. It was an issue that we brought to the then superintendent, and we were able to work through it. So this isn't a matter of, to be clear, just training outside. It's making sure that your assistants know what their obligations are and that your law enforcement partners do, and that we are compiling that information and making that information readily available so that we are not putting witnesses on the stand who we shouldn't, and more importantly, that the defense counsel is fully apprised of what the officer's credibility findings are so that they can prepare appropriately.
Thank you. And just a very quick yes/no follow-up. I'm just going to run through the 3 candidates. Just yes or no. Would you fight to require CPD to disclose to your office any information that goes to the credibility of a testifying police officer? Mr. Conway, yes or no?
Yes.
Mr. Fioretti?
Yes.
And State's Attorney Fox?
Yes, and I have.